bright future. Every student matters.
Hi students, welcome to the session. In this session, we are going to start with the chapter that is respiration in organisms. In this session, we are going to talk about why is respiration important, how the respiration takes place in human beings as well as other organisms, also the different types of respirations that are there that we observe in the living organisms. Now, let's take a simple example which you might have noticed, in your daily life also, and maybe you do not give much importance to it. But today we are going to discuss that phenomena and we are going to explain that why does it happen. And that phenomena is that suppose whenever you are running around, right, whenever you're playing, or let's say you are racing, right, so after say 7 minutes, 10 minutes of running around, you feel that you are breathing heavily and you're taking deep breaths, right? So I'm pretty sure that you never would have thought that why this happens. But now if you think about it, have you ever wondered that why this thing happens and why do you start breathing heavily? Why do you start taking deep breaths? This is something which we are going to understand, that what is the process of respiration and how does it happen and why is it important. Also, when we are talking about respiration, there is a phenomena which is happening day in and day out every single second, and that is breathing, right? I'm pretty sure none of us notice the breath that we take in and take out, right? Where the inhalation and the exhalation process is something that we never notice, right? But that process again is a very complex process, and we need to understand that how this happens. And when you will see that what are the different parts that are involved in this process, you will realize that how complex this process is and how easily our body is able to perform this, right? So respiration, we are going to talk about respiration, and we are going to talk about breathing. And many a times we confuse breathing and respiration. We think that it is one and the same thing. But students, in this session, in this chapter, we are going to understand that breathing and respiration are different, because breathing is a part of respiration, right? So now let's start and talk about the first topic, that is why do we respire? What is the need of respiration? Now students, in your previous chapters you have talked about cell, right? We saw that cell is the basic structural and functional unit, right? Structural and functional unit of life, right? Why do we say so? Because cell is a single cell is the basis of life, meaning that one cell and then two cells and different cells join together to form an organism, right? All the multicellular organisms are made up of many cells joined together. We also saw that there are certain unicellular organisms also. So this is why it is known as the structural unit. When we talk about the functional unit, why is cell called the functional unit? Because cell has the capability of performing all the life processes that we see in the human beings, that is, or any living organism for that matter. That is the nutrition, right, respiration, excretion, etc. So different kinds of processes that are happening in the body are also happening inside a single cell. So each cell of our body is performing all of these processes, and each of the cell is performing all of these processes. And to perform all these processes, it needs energy. Now, where do the cell get the energy from? In the previous chapters, we studied that all the energy that we need, we get from the food. But that is not the whole story. Definitely, food is important for our survival. We take in the food, say for example, we are eating a meal, we are eating chapati, we are eating dal and vegetables, and what happens is when we chew it, we digest it, and what we do is that we've seen that digested food is absorbed. Now what happens? The next step is, students, that the food that has the stored energy in it has to be processed so that it can release the energy. and how does that processing take place? So all the living organisms respire to get the energy from the food. So the stored energy from the food is processed, or we obtain that energy from the food with the help of the process called as respiration, right? So once the food is digested in the digestive system, the next thing which happens is the breakdown of food in the cell, which releases the energy, and this whole process is called as cellular respiration, right? So the process of breakdown of food in the cell with the release of energy is called as the cellular respiration. Now, if you remember, when we started talking about respiration, I told you that breathing is just a part of respiration, right? This is the second part. So, the first part of respiration is breathing, that is taking in oxygen-rich air, and the second part is cellular respiration, where the food that has been absorbed is broken down such that it releases energy. Now, it is very important to understand that in human beings or many living organisms, oxygen is the one element which is required to release the energy or to break down the food, right? Now, if you think about it, students, when the absorption happened, the food, all the nutrients of the food got absorbed, and now they are present in the cell. The nutrients that are there in the cell have to release the energy, right? For that, they need to break down. Why is it necessary for us to respire or breathe, right, to break down the food? Because when we are breathing in, we are taking in oxygen, and this breakdown happens in the presence of oxygen. Now remember, students, when we say that it happens in the presence of oxygen, not all organisms require oxygen for respiration to take place. We are going to study about this type in detail in this session, right? For now, it is important for us to remember that there are two parts of respiration. One is breathing and other is cellular respiration, that is breaking down of food in the cell to release energy, right? So what is the relationship between breathing and cellular respiration? Let's understand that. So like I said, whenever we are breathing, there are two processes that are involved. We take in oxygen, right? So first of all, we take in oxygen, and what we do next is we release the carbon dioxide, right? So the air that we breathe in, that is rich in oxygen, and the air that we breathe out contains more percentage of carbon dioxide, right? We are going to talk about the process of breathing in detail. For now, let's just understand that how breathing and cellular respiration are related. So like I said, first of all, we take in the oxygen, and this oxygen is transported to all the parts of the body, and it reaches all these cells, right? Each and every cell of the body receives oxygen, right? The oxygen that reaches the cell is utilized to break down the food that is present in each cell, or the nutrition that they have obtained because of absorption. Once it happens, once the breakdown is, once the breakdown is done, the energy that is, that was stored in the food is released, and the cell gets the energy to perform all the small life processes that are important for the survival of the cell, right? Once this process is complete, the cell releases carbon dioxide as a byproduct, right? And this byproduct is again transported back, and we release the air out, which contains more percentage of carbon dioxide. So this is the relationship between breathing and cellular respiration, and that's why we say there are two parts of respiration. First is breathing and second is cellular respiration. Both of these are important parts of this whole process, which helps us in getting the energy from the food. In the absence of oxygen, in human beings, we will not be able to obtain the energy from the food, right? So this is the importance of respiration. Now, in the cells, what happens is that the food is broken down into carbon dioxide water and energy in the presence of oxygen, right? Whenever the respiration takes place in the presence of oxygen, it is called as aerobic respiration. Now, over here we are going to distinguish between the two types of respiration that we see. First is the aerobic respiration. What happens in this type of respiration is that the glucose that we obtain from the food material is present in each cell. Then what happens next is the oxygen that we obtain from the air, the glucose utilizes the air, oxygen present in the air, and breaks down further to release carbon dioxide, water and ATP. This ATP is the energy molecule, right? This ATP is the one which contains energy and is utilized by the cells to obtain energy, right? So this is what is produced. Carbon dioxide and water are the byproducts of this particular process, right? And what happens to these byproducts? These are thrown out of the body with the help of the lungs, right? Now, the process of respiration, where the importance or the presence of oxygen is required, is called as the aerobic respiration, right? So in this kind of respiration, the presence of oxygen is essential. If the oxygen is not present, this kind of respiration will not take place. Aerobic respiration is seen in human beings, right? In different animals, right? It is also seen in plants. We are going to talk about the breathing or respiration in plants in this chapter. For now, let's just understand that aerobic respiration is the type where most of the multicellular organisms perform this kind of respiration. That is, they require the presence of oxygen for breaking down their food. Now, there are another type of organisms. These are small unicellular organisms which do not require the presence of oxygen for respiration. Rather, the presence of oxygen is harmful for them, right? These kind of organisms are called as anaerobes. One such example is yeast, right? So yeast actually goes under the anaerobic respiration. Let's first understand that how does this happen and what is the byproduct. In this case, glucose is broken down into ethanol and carbon dioxide along with the energy. When we talk about the anaerobic or aerobic respiration, when we compare the two, there are two differences. The very first and the most important difference is aerobic respiration requires oxygen, whereas anaerobic respiration does not require oxygen. The other difference is that in the aerobic respiration, more energy is released, lot of energy is released. But when we talk of anaerobic respiration, the energy released is comparatively lesser than the aerobic, but it is enough for yeast to function. Now, when you look at this process, you see that there is the release of ethanol as the byproduct and carbon dioxide as the byproduct. This is the reason why yeast is used on commercial basis in the alcohol industry to release the alcohol, right? So industries like wine industry utilize the presence of yeast for making these alcohols, right? And the another use of yeast is in the bakery industry, right? Because of the release of carbon dioxide, what happens is that the dough, right, whatever dough is made, it rises up, right? So suppose this is the dough that was made with the addition of your yeast. When it is kept outside for some time, you will see that it has risen up and the volume increases, right? So in this way the volume has increased because the yeast respires and releases carbon dioxide and the volume of the dough increases. You will study about this whole process in detail in your higher class, right? For now, it's just important to understand that yeast is a unique Yeast is a unicellular organism which goes under anaerobic respiration to obtain energy, and it doesn't require oxygen. On the other hand, the presence of oxygen would usually the anaerobes do not require. So for the organisms which do not require oxygen, sometimes the oxygen rich environment is toxic to them. Now it is a very interesting fact, even for us, we've seen that we require oxygen for respiration and for our survival, but for even us, if we go into the environment which is highly rich in oxygen, that becomes toxic for us also, right? So an optimum amount of oxygen is required by us, but especially for anaerobes, this kind of environment which is oxygen rich becomes toxic, right? So this is all about the anaerobic respiration. This happens, like I said, in the unicellular organisms. But there is another anaerobic respiration which happens in the human beings, and that happens in the muscles. Now, how does this happen? Let us understand this phenomena. We've seen that each and every day what we are doing, whenever, like 24/7, each second we are respiring. That means we are breathing in and breathing out. But whenever we are doing exercises which need high energy, we see that our rate of breathing increases. That means that we start breathing heavily, and also we start taking deep breaths. Why is that? Because, like for example, right now I'm sitting and talking to you. I do not require that kind of energy. But if I stand up and I start running around, what will happen? That my muscles will require more and more energy to sustain, to help me run, right? But the breathing that I am doing is not enough. So what happens? The rate of breathing increases. That means I start breathing heavily. I start taking more and more air in my lungs. But this is still not enough. You must have observed that the players, right? All the players, when, say for example, athletes who run for 100-meter races, or even you when you're playing footballs and you're running around or you're chasing each other, what happens is that you are not able to, many a times you are not able to obtain that kind of energy which you require or which your muscles require. So in this case, to complete the immediate need of the energy by your body, muscles start breaking down the glucose in anaerobic fashion. What they do is, the glucose that is present in muscle cells is broken down into lactic acid and energy. Now here also, students, please understand that the energy that is released during this process is utilized immediately by the muscles. But the lactic acid which is released is one of the byproducts that remains in the muscle. Until and unless you stop running, this kind of respiration keeps taking place. So in human body also, anaerobic respiration takes place in muscles. And this is to fulfill the energy requirement during the high energy activities, that means running around, playing and different other things. Now, once we have understood this process, there is another very important thing which you might wonder, that why do you get muscle cramps after heavy exercises? Now, this is a simple activity which you can do, or what you can do is you race with your friends for say 200-meter or 100-meter, and after running you will find that say after running 100-meter, after some time you will find that your muscles have pain. That means your muscles have cramps. What is the reason because of those cramps? The reason is the accumulation of lactic acid, right? We saw that in this anaerobic respiration which occurs in the muscle, lactic acid was produced as the byproduct, but energy that was released during that time is utilized immediately, but lactic acid keeps on accumulating. When we were talking about aerobic respiration, we saw that the carbon dioxide that was released was thrown out of the body. In yeast also we saw that anaerobic respiration, where CO2 was released outside the body of the yeast. But in this case, the byproduct is lactic acid which keeps on accumulating in the body. This lactic acid is formed because of the absence of oxygen. After some time, say when you have run now and you sit down for some time, what happens is, say for 2 hours you are sitting, you have cramps. After resting for 2 hours or 3 hours, you start feeling better and the cramps go away. The reason for that is that oxygen starts coming to that particular muscle in an ample amount, because you are at rest, so your muscle do not require that high amount of energy. Oxygen comes towards the muscle that has the lactic acid accumulation, and in the presence of that oxygen, the lactic acid is broken down, and because of the lactic acid breaking down, the cramps start getting or you get start getting relief from the cramps, right? So accumulation of the lactic acid causes the muscle cramp. Now, the other way in which we get relief from the muscle cramp is by massages, right? If we start massaging our area, suppose if you have a muscle cramp in your calf area, when you start massaging it, after some time you start feeling better. Or if you take a hot water bath or you dip your legs in the hot water, so what happens at that time also, you feel better. The reason for this is that both of these activities increase the circulation of blood. When the circulation of blood increases in the area, what will happen? That oxygen will reach quickly, right? So when the circulation increases in the area where you are massaging or when you are taking hot water baths, what happens? The circulation of the blood increases, thus increasing the supply of oxygen, right? When the supply of oxygen in these areas increases, the lactic acid which has accumulated starts breaking down and you start getting relief from the muscle cramps, right? So when the lactic acid breaks, it breaks down into the complete breakdown occurs, and it breaks down into carbon dioxide and water, right? And because of this breakdown we get relief in our muscle cramps, right? So in this way, students, we talked about why do we respire, and we also saw the two important parts of or two important classification of the respiration, that is aerobic and anaerobic.